Let's start this page so we can have a bit of a chat about how you approach that, and then we will speak briefly about REST. The thing with REST is it's not unlike the HTTP we did. So like in terms of demo, it looks much the same. I'll just point out some of the unique parts that you get back from a good REST API, and that will be like looking at the things that we were speaking about yesterday and what that looks like in practice. So what happens when you call an API and actually get hypermedia back, and you use the verbs and things like that, and URIs appropriately. There's not an explicit exercise up the end of that. I'll email around a link to the process that I'm following, like the instructions that I follow in this demo, so that you can go through it yourself, because it might it's valuable to have seen it and practiced it, because you'll need to do it more for the coursework. In fact, maybe I'll force you to do that. Right, so CSSs. What I've done, so that we can have a look at a range of them, and to point out this really neat feature. In your HTML file, you can add alternative style sheets. So you don't have to have just one link rel style sheet. You can have a whole bunch of them and leave it to the user to select, which isn't really used that often. There are very, very, very few websites that will do this. But it does mean like you can offer the user a higher contrast version of your design or something like that if you want to make it accessible. But it's also really useful for demonstrating this, because all you guys have submitted a different CSS file, and now I can just select between them in the browser. The way you access that in the browser. So this is the file you were styling with nothing on it. But we can then go to View Page Style. This is in Firefox. It's a bit trickier to do it in the browser. But then we can select one, and it'll apply that CSS to that particular person. So who is this? What group is this? What was the point at people? It's like
not me.
What was your general design aim with this? What were you trying to go for? And what were you trying to how did you approach it?
Something that didn't make me feel horrible about myself when I finished.
What would have made you feel horrible about it?
Well, okay, so
the colours on that. That's really
the contrast isn't very good on that screen.
It's a projector. That's what happens.
So
there are coloured boxes around it. It looks quite pretty.
Yeah, the colour boxes. I wanted to split into 3 sections, being the sidebar, that sort of Zen Garden Beauty to this design blog, like intro section, and then those 4 bits at the bottom, the main content of the article. And I also got overzealous with the transitions and animations, which is why those do that.
And how did you do that? How were the transitions done?
Through pain, blood, and agony.
I don't think that's a CSS property.
You'd be surprised. Somewhere there you'll find some design name, design selection, not that bit. That bit. So there's about 6 or so of those which allow that to happen without ruining the rest of the page. It's very difficult. What makes it really, really difficult is that it's a list item, and the word by hasn't got any class or target or anything like that associated with it. So to make the by author name do the animation without everything else doing the animation, I have to reset it twice. I have to reset the design name twice, which is why it's so long.
Sounds messy. I think you probably could have.
If I could have modified the HTML, which I didn't, then it's much easier.
Because said you can't modify the HTML.
Yeah, but you would have done it on this, and it would look wrong anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess it's some of the interesting things that are. So there is CSS is enormous. CSS has expanded to cover everything that like designers could possibly think to want to do with a page, and things like the transformations, so things that animate and move about, are sort of the extreme end of that. That's where people are getting jazzy with what they want to look on the site. But it's like, this is used like a bunch of nice things that are worth being aware of, things like border radius. So we spoke about borders for putting things, putting lines around things, but this one uses border radius to curve off the edges, which is a very common in a lot of design styles, to sort of soften the shapes and round them off. What else do we use here? I'm going to ask you a question. How did you get the layout so when we had this without, everything was underneath each other? How did you get the menu over on the side and so on? It's all just in order, but this stuff has been shifted up to the side. What was your approach for that?
I'm genuinely not sure.
Don't
Do
know.
one of the other groups?
No, I did it all myself, but I'm not. So it's
Getting on group work.
I mean,
I'm joking.
Okay, so I don't understand fully yet how the positioning in CSS works. So I just played around with things until it looked right how I wanted it to. So I know, the sidebar on the right takes up 25 or 20, I can't remember which percent of space, and it uses the absolute positioning to stick it to the top right. The intro section, as it were, takes up 80% of the space, doesn't have any positioning, and that just works. I don't quite know why it always works. It does.
So, layout in CSS is tricky. It is one of the weirdest things in CSS. The older versions of CSS2 didn't really have the power to do quite what you wanted with them. And if you you'll hit a stage where if you're working on any CSS, you'll be like, how do I do this in CSS? Particularly with layout, you'll Google it and you'll find 30 or 40 different answers. They're all slightly different, but they all sort of get you to the same point, often with compromises. So be aware that sometimes happens. Often it's just a matter of picking the one that works best-ish and going with that. But yeah, the whole laying out and box model gets quite complicated. There are these things called floats. Who used float in their group? There was definitely a couple. So this is to do with whether the thing, whether each of the new boxes flow down or whether they flow into the gaps to the side. And again, it's sort of well defined, but understanding the well definedness of it is very complex. Very few people I know that do this as a living quite have a handle on it. So it is tricky, and it's one of those things that only comes with practice and experience to get the layout quite like you want. The other thing that's worth pointing out about that, so one of the hardest things about layout with CSS is that you normally want things to be sort of proportional to each other, or you want something to be a fixed size but the other things to expand to fit the space and things like that. And in CSS2, it didn't really have the expression to do that. You could make things percentage sizes, but then both would scale with the size. But sometimes you'd want something to be you'd want this one to be a fixed size, and you'd want this to be a percentage size, and then you want all of the rest of the space. You want almost a wild card. And yeah, CSS2 didn't really have support for that. CSS3 is meant to be getting support for sort of mixed type values. So where you could say the width is 200 pixels plus something percent, or the width of something else minus a particular value. I don't think many browsers support that yet. Can anyone correct that? Has anyone used that part of CSS3?
Which part is it?
They're using variables as part of the mixed data types for widths and heights and stuff.
No,
I don't think it's there yet. I don't think the support is fully there yet. Okay, let's have a look at a couple more. So there were some interesting ones, I thought. There were quite a few that were just sort of nice and straightforward. Let's sort of group them. This looks better if there's a bit more. Just quite straightforward designs, good demonstration of using images and sort of changing the headings and put boxes around things to sort of group them. Good padding between sort of text and menus and things like that. I thought that was quite a nice one, which we can do this. Whose group was this? What was the aim of this? What was the design? What were your principles for putting this together? Beautiful. How do you make it beautiful? That sounds subjective to me. What is the technical set of steps that we can go through to make our CSS beautiful?
I'm not passing on to a detail.
What did he say?
What are the technical steps that we can follow to automate making things beautiful?
I really don't know. Like,
Because there is.
I just put the aside with the right side.
I think most generally we went for that minimalistic design.
Yeah.
Right?
It was a minimalistic look.
And because of guidance, like, we applied moving.
I see where the green theme is coming through. That makes sense. So I think the lesson there is that typically, like as the developer side of things is not users doing this design, what will often happen is that someone who is a graphic designer will mock up what the page is meant to look like in Photoshop or something like that, and then you get given that and you have to like match the gap. You have to write the CSS to make it look like the image. So we sort of made it a little bit tricky for you to for this one because we haven't given you that like anything to aim for. So yeah, we're definitely not like in this. We're not testing you for like how good can you style something. We're looking for like are you using appropriate properties in the appropriate places. But as a shortcut for doing something like this, it's not a bad idea to look at other examples, look at other websites, see what their designs are, and like this is where I'm sure this principle of like putting the menu on the right hand side has come from. Is I've seen another website do that. That looked quite interesting. How did they do that? And because all the representation formats that we use on the web are accessible, like you go to the browser and you right click and go to view source, you can get access to all this. So if you want to know how someone did that, you can go and look at their that was the default one because I wanted to there we go. And you can get the CSS and submit it as zip as a CSS file.
It's encrypted.
There we go. So you can right click on it, you can go and look at the CSS, you can drill down into which element that you're interested in. Oh, okay, so you can even use inspect elements. So we're interested in this element, let's go and have a look at what that works. And then once you've selected that element, you can then go and look at the CSS that the browser is using to render that. And you can copy it, like it's open, it's there. You can use this as sort of influence for how you design your things.
And the 3D view as well.
The 3D view, have we got that trimmed?
Certainly.
I'm not going to set on the application. The 3D view is fun, but I'm not going to demo. Should I then set it now?
Yeah, it's
Come
fun.
on, it's Friday afternoon. Let's go to the 3D view. There we go. That was all. So, like, another tool in terms of debugging what's going on your page, you can view. Does Chrome have this support? I know Firefox does it. Chrome is useful.
Oh, come on.
So what's interesting here is that, like, as you look at that slice through the page, you see all the different raised levels. Those are elements that are inside other ones. So
Find the property.
They haven't got this in Chrome.
sorry,
They haven't got that in Chrome.
it hasn't got it in Chrome.
No.
There's probably an extension you can get for Chrome, but it's not there. So like this one, that there, I'm guessing that's like an emphasis tag or something like that. CSS or a link, but that. Can you see that's laying inside that bigger one? So that's going to be like a paragraph, and that's going to be an emphasis or a link or something like that. Sorry, what was that?
Try double clicking.
Weird. Nothing. It's not giving me anything.
More.
And yeah, just it's a good way of visualizing it's a way of visualizing the structure of your page, what's inside what. You can sort of see where, like, which boxes affect which other things. These tools are really, really useful. Go out and play with them. How do I get out of this mode now? Anyway, right, I think that's enough CSS. Were there any questions about the CSS task? Did anyone think, I can't possibly do this? Like that? No? Okay, right, we're going to talk a bit about REST. We're going to have a look at PayPal as an example. Mostly because it's like the only thing out there that does that you guys will recognise and actually does PTOS, does this hypermedia as the engine of application state. Unfortunately, like things like Twitter have got quite a nice REST API, but they don't really, or what they claim is a REST API, doesn't really do this hypermedia approach as explicitly as PayPal does. And like I guess the reason for that is an API like Twitter is pretty is one shot. You send a tweet and it gets published, and there's not a lot that you're going to do afterwards. But PayPal is sort of it's a process, so it makes sense that you're at various states in this process. You do the thing like you request a payment to be made, and then you're waiting for that to exist, and then you might execute that payment. So you might say, let's actually pay this bill, and then that comes back from the person who's actually logging in and paying through PayPal, and at the other end you get confirmation and the various links from that. So each stage there's options of what to do. I am going to show you this. This page is linked off the edge there, and it's what I recommend you go and play with to experiment using a REST call, a REST API, and it sort of steps you through these first steps. So it's make your first call on the PayPal website, and we're gonna step through some of the first bits of this in Postman just to demonstrate it. The other thing that's useful to be aware of is the APIs for these things. So there are these big documents that will go through in minute detail all of the things that all of the various REST endpoints do. By REST endpoint, I mean the URI. That is a resource that you're interacting with, and they'll even so as well as let's find a good example. So this documentation will do things like, for each action that you can do within it, you have what method you're using, maybe even which multiple methods you're able to use, the URI that you're using to access that, and you'll notice we've got in the middle here, they've highlighted it, I can probably see it here, they've highlighted it with a box around it, so that's one of those URL parameters that we were talking about yesterday. So yesterday we were talking about putting curly brackets or square brackets around it. So that's a parameter. And then it's got a description of what this does, so what happens, maybe some issues around it, a list of the parameters and what they do. There we go, parameters, payment ID, and information about what happens in the request and the response. So data about what data should you send to this, what data should you expect to receive back, and also sample examples of this happening. So on the right hand side you'll see a curl, a set of steps in curl to do the post to this endpoint. It tells you what headers that you might pass to it, tells you what data you send to it, and it even then shows you an example of the response that you get back. But let's do that for setting up a payment for PayPal. We'll see how that goes. So the first step we want to do So the first thing we're going to do is authenticate, because this is an API that requires authentication. So what our whole goal is to set up a payment and then see what the options are at the end of that payment. But the first thing we have to do is authenticate. And the way we do this in Postman is a little bit different to the way you do it in curl. In curl, well, that PayPal example will lead you through how to do it in curl. And it's all this requires some setup in advance. So you have to go to if you want to do this, you'll have to go to the PayPal website and set up like a developer account. So you'll go to developer.paypal.com and there's a login there, and you can log in and create fake test accounts. You can create, they call it a sandbox. I don't know, that window open. And they call it a sandbox, and you get a fake PayPal account that you can use to pretend to do these interactions for your testing purposes. From that, you get a couple of pieces of information that are effectively your username and your password for that setup, for that fake account. But they're a username and password that doesn't look like a username. It looks like two really complicated passwords. So these are their example usernames and passwords. With curl, you're using the -u flag, and that you provide the username : the password to tell it you're authenticating. We're going to do that through what's it called? Through Postman. Yeah, good answer. Note that we have to pass it some data. We have to pass it some form data. This is the variable name, grant type, and client credentials. So let's do it in Postman. In Postman, they have this set up for doing OAuth 2. This is all part of something called of an authentication type called OAuth 2. In curl, you have to do it manually. You have to do the steps of that interaction manually. In Postman, it will do a bunch of the steps for you. So if we're going to get new access, I've even got all my stuff in there. We can tell it to do the authentication loop, the authentication protocol for us, and handle that. What that involves is sending a request to a set URI, which is this one. Again, it's defined in the documentation, but a set URI called OAuth2 token. And we pass to it that username and that password, so the client and the client secret, and we tell it that we want the client credentials. So that's that -d. So that -d. So we want client credentials rather than any other swap. So authorization code is the other option. So we give it the URL we're going to, the ID that we're connecting to, the secret that we're connecting to, the ID that we're authenticating with, the secret that we're authenticating with. And for the sake of the fact that we might be setting up multiple of these within Postman, we can give it a name. If we hit request token, that should go off and get us a token. And what the token is a temporary, almost like a temporary password, a temporary identifier to allow us to communicate with the PayPal API for a certain amount of time. So it is this bit down here, see where it says access token. All the tokens have a different type, so you'll find some APIs give you a different type token back. This one gives you a bearer token back. And what we then do is we pass that token to the API with every other request that we do. And the web service, PayPal's web service, knows that it's us because we have that unique number. Like, the idea being that this is quite a high bit value. It's hard to guess. Like if someone's trying to pretend to be you, it's hard to guess. But the other benefit is that it expires as well. So there's a number down here. That's a number of seconds, I think, until it expires. And after that point, you can refresh. You can ask for another token, but this token won't authenticate you anymore. So that means that partly it's impossible to guess this number within that amount of time. Like guessing this number would take a lot of compute power or time, and that time's small enough to stop that being viable. But also means that PayPal can kick you out if they want to. They can stop you accessing the API if that, after that time expires. They could choose to not authenticate you again if they think you're abusing the service. So good practice, REST API. So let's use this as an example. So we're going to hit use token, and you'll see that puts a header into the into our header setting. In this case, the authorization header, and you notice we have to put both the type and the value of that header. So authorization bearer and the number. So that's done that step for us. It's put the bearer token in. What we then have to do is tell it that we're doing a particular task. And the first thing that you do in this particular API is that you look, you get the payments URI, and you do a post to send it the information about your particular purchase. So if we take their example, we'll have a look at the data that goes into that. So this API works in JSON data. So you're both communicating, like you're receiving data as JSON, you're sending data as JSON. And rather than write this from scratch, I'm just going to fix it in. So to send raw JSON, we have to put it in the raw element, and we have to set the type to be application/JSON. Let's just have a look at what's going into this data, so we're aware. See that one? So this is not something you can guess what that format's going to be like. You have to use documentation to go and figure it out. Sometimes you'll find REST APIs that are self-describing. So you will attempt to access them, and you'll get it wrong, and you'll get fed back the structure that you're meant to use. So there's something like, as long as that's in a data format as well, as long as that's XML or JSON, then you have the possibility of your program, your application, processing that and figuring out what to do with it. But generally, you go to the API to work out what this data is. And you use their examples and you modify them, or you look through the documentation that tell you what the different options for each of these properties are, and you read the documentation to figure out what to do with them. So, what are they doing here? They're asking you what the intent of this payment is. You're trying to make a sale. Like again, those will be predefined in the documentation as to what your options are there. You're doing some transactions. So this is square bracket JSON is an array and a list of things. So we've got a number of we've got one transaction here, and within the transaction we have an amount and a sort of currency and a value as well. It's asked for a payer as well, so you can choose different payment methods through this. I guess that's so you can go to people and pay by credit card rather than PayPal account or something. And it's got some redirect URLs. A lot of APIs use this, particularly where they're APIs for a third-party service. And the idea is that at some point in this process, like you're setting up the payment, but at some point you're going to redirect the person to the PayPal website, because PayPal is the one doing the user authentication here. And then PayPal needs to know where to send them back afterwards. So you'll find URLs that have this sort of, APIs that have this sort of structure will have a return URL to get them back to your site. So this is meant to be a URL for our site or for our application. Of course, we're doing this manually rather than actually running it, like building a bit of software. So we're not really going to make use of that feature. So we're going to post this data to it. We've got a header that's got the content type and the authorization information. If we send that, then we get back from the PayPal API some more JSON. And again, documentation tells you the structure of this. It tells you what all those properties mean, what's there. We've got things to point out. We've got a unique ID. So this is something that's generated. We didn't, like we were asking to set up a payment, and we sent it information about what we wanted in that payment, but we didn't have, we didn't have a unique identifier for that. It's PayPal that did that. It's repeated a bunch of the information we sent it, so it's repeated the intent, it's repeated the payer, the transaction part. That's sort of for our confirmation, but also because it's information that's part of the whole resource. It's got metadata like the create time, but the thing I really, really, really want to hammer home and make clear and remind you guys is it's got this section at the bottom called links. This is hypermedia. This is Helios. This is like the equivalent. So when you go to a web page, you get back a document that's got links in it that tell you what you can go to next. And that might, for you, as we saw in the examples with the CSS, that might be a box on the right-hand side that is the menu of links to all the places that you need to go to. If you gave that to a machine, if you gave your web page to a machine, it's difficult to make a computer program that can detect, oh, this thing on the right-hand side looks like a menu and is a set of links of what to do next. That is severely non-trivial. That is not a problem we've solved yet. And when we do, it'll almost certainly be applied to military purposes, and Skynet will happen, and the world will end. But for the sake of these, when we need the machines to be able to understand what they can go to next, and that to be automatic and derived from data, the sort of de facto standard way of doing that in REST APIs is to have a link section, which then has a list of links that are definitions for where to go next. And you'll notice this defines sort of 2 or 3 really, really important attributes, much like the attributes that you have in an A. That is the URI of where to go next. You'll see the options that we have are, we have this one, which is the URI of this document. You might want to refresh that and get the data of it again. You have the URI of where on PayPal we're going to send them for the person to check out, and we have the URI of actually doing this payment, so actually executing that payment. And this defines our state in the application. These links are telling us where we are in the process. We've just created the payment, so we don't have options like viewing the receipt, because the receipt hasn't been generated yet. The payment hasn't completed, there's no receipts. When we get to the end of this process, once we've got the person to approve the payment and we've executed the payment, we've taken the money from their account, there'll be a receipt option. So the very end of this process, the very last call that you make, will come back with a link, and the link will have a receipt link to be able to give to the user for the user to follow to get their receipt. But yeah, the important thing is these links show you where to go next, what the next options are, and they tell you how to do that. So they give you the URI, they give you the method that you're meant to use to make that happen, and they give you a sort of a label for it. So the rel is sort of a name, a label for what does this thing do. So this one's itself. This is the data that you just retrieved. This one's for executing the payment. This one's for approving, getting the user to approve. And that section will change each time you make when you do something. Well, it probably won't change if you do self. If you call self, you'll get the same data back. But once you do an execute, you'll have moved to a different state in the program. You'll have moved to a different state in the payment process for PayPal. And that will give you a different set of options to follow up. So, link section, very, very important. This is what we're looking for in our REST APIs. As I say, I'd recommend going, the link is on EdgeShare, I'd recommend, maybe as a group, going to have a go through those steps and see what you get back, see what it's like to set up the authorization and to actually retrieve some information back from this API. As an exercise to the reader, if you can find another REST API that does the Hateos approach well, I'd be very interested in hearing about it. That's not a challenge to say that it isn't there, but they seem to be quite difficult to find. So if you can find a good example of that, bonus WebArchitect marks are on the table. Are there any questions about REST? So the interaction, what you're actually doing, the interaction method is very much like HTTP. You are interacting with URIs and getting data back. But the important difference is what's going in, like what's being sent to the URIs is well defined. What's being retrieved from the URIs has a well defined structure, and you get indication of where to go next. And most APIs, the data won't include what to do next. They'll just give you the raw data. We're going to be talking about this more over the next couple of weeks. So we'll talk about this a bit more next Thursday and Friday. Give me a shout if there's any questions. I'll be here for another 10 minutes if you've got any questions that you want to ask now. Otherwise, have a lovely weekend, and I'll see you next week.
跟我去健身吧。
现在去，我没带装备去。
你如果要健身哪里最近？是这边还是美国？
我一般都在学校健身。你办游泳卡了是吧
？165磅所有都可以用啊，所有的地方拿所有的设备都可以用。
在 Mayflower 也能用，学校的，在 Liberty 也能用。
只要是Southampton的都可以用。
是不是？是，
我是在 Mayflower。
你在 Mayflower 用学校的卡健身吗
？Mayflower 那个健身房是
很好的。那个 Liberty 的呢？
我这没去过。如果是拿，就是他写到是拿上面有那个是拿。